10 years ago, the most overhyped slop on the market was The Witcher 3. People came out and worshiped this game. They called it Game of the Year. They called the DLC Game of 2016. And the narrative for about a decade was that CD Projekt Red was the greatest developer in gaming. Poles are superior game devs to other countries, especially Japan. You saw like game journals worship them, bend over backwards for them. You had people upgrading their PCs for Cyberpunk 2077 in 2012, right? You had all this silly nonsense. People were convinced that CD Projekt Red was going to be the next big thing and that they were going to dominate the industry after the success of The Witcher 3. And what happened? It completely and utterly collapsed within like 4 years. Okay, we never got a sequel to The Witcher. Every new IP they've tried has failed. All the people they've hired have been garbage at their jobs, right? Only the most hardcore, dedicated shills are sticking with CD Projekt Red at this point, and have been for a long time. It's honestly kind of startling just how quickly it's happened. How the Witcher brand went from like the golden goose child of the game journal industry to just being unceremoniously replaced with Baldur's Gate 3 and Larian, right? The Witcher 3, in a lot of ways, is probably the last relevant AAA game ever, right? Because it was the last release where the industry was genuinely able to gaslight people into thinking a major AAA title was superior to Nintendo ones at the same time, right? The Witcher 3 has faded into irrelevancy, while games like Xenoblade Chronicles X are more relevant than ever. And because Xenoblade Chronicles X was better to begin with, we're seeing more and more sequels to that. We're seeing Monolith Soft tackle more and more projects, and they're heavily involved in The Witcher's direct competition. Games like The Legend of Zelda, which, of course, The Witcher never came close to top it. And that is the important thing to note about this, is that The Witcher never even came close to surpassing Zelda or surpassing the major Nintendo IPs or even surpassing notable fantasy series, because that's always been the cope for a lot of these people. It's like, well, they're based on actual books. Yeah, books people don't actually read. Okay, the only people who care about the Witcher books are hardcore fanboys of the video games. They're not particularly special. They're not interesting. They're not engaging. They're not considered classics. They are the Halo tie-in novels of their time. Like, they are complete trash and should be considered as such. And the less said about the Witcher Netflix show, the better. So what we have here is an IP that has completely squandered all of its goodwill, that has completely collapsed, that has become completely irrelevant, that nobody cares about, nobody talks about, nobody plays, right? Like The Witcher had its time in the sun, but it failed to capture the success that games like Pokemon have had, right? The Witcher is a declining brand. And the reception to The Witcher 4, a game that was only produced because CD Projekt Red was put into a bad situation after the abject failure of Cyberpunk 2077, it's safe to say that this series is not going to innovate, it's not going to grow, it's not going to evolve, and most importantly, it is going to alienate its core audience. People take one look at the one thing we know about the game. You get to play as the Witcher, Ciri, and immediately everyone's just like, oh, it's The Last of Us Part 2 again. We don't need to know anything about the game. We don't need to know anything about the plot, the setting, like what Ciri's going through, how she became a Witcher. Like, we don't need to know any of that. Like, instead, all we have to do is just look at that trailer see how garbage it looks, and then go back to our Nintendo Switches and play all the numerous superior RPGs on that hardware, right? Like, who are they attempting to fool with this, right? Like, who are they attempting to pull in, right? Geralt of Rivia established himself as a gaming icon, quote unquote, simply for not being a bald space marine. But they're going to replace the character and replace him with the female sidekick just for political SJW brownie points, right? They're going to try and do the same thing they did with The Last of Us Part 2 and Star Wars, where they're going to try and shit on their established male hero to make their female lead look better rather than like making a compelling, interesting female character who can stand on her own 2 feet. Like, and again, I've been saying this a lot lately when it comes to these female protagonists. Nintendo does not have this problem. No one's going into Metroid Prime 4 complaining about Samus being a girl, right? Like, Samus didn't replace some male lead, right? Zelda didn't completely reinvent her character when she became playable. Princess Peach didn't just become Mario, in Princess Peach Showtime. No, Nintendo actually put in a lot of time and effort to make these female leads interesting, unique, and distinct from their male ones. But with Siri and other characters like her, it's like they're all copy and pasted from Rey from Star Wars. The same exact character archetype. She's never been in the Millennium Falcon, but she knows how it works better than Han Solo does, right? Rey is a better Jedi than Luke ever was. Ooh, like Leia never uses the Force in the original trilogy, but somehow she can fly like Superman across the screen and destroy a space station or whatever. Like again, when you look at how these people handle their female leads, Cora, I think, being the definitive example, like you get this sense where their prerogative is not to create a compelling, interesting story that people will relate to and enjoy. Like the idea is to gaslight you into thinking that this female character is cool and hardcore and can do anything a man can do, and it just doesn't work like at all. Like people see through it right away, and it's gotten to the point where it's been very tiresome. Right? They've been repeating the same cliches over and over and over again, hoping that people start like thinking they're real, but in actuality all that's done is just led to people realizing that there is some kind of very real agenda, right? People are starting to see through what these people are trying to accomplish, and as a result of it they're rejecting it before it even comes out. Like there is no enthusiasm about The Witcher 4 going into uh, after this announcement. Absolutely none. Like it's true that The Last of Us, that new game that not Neil Druckmann's working on, like it's true that that's even a bigger disaster. But to me, Neil Druckmann, because of his nepotism and because of his position, because of like his influence, like Neil Druckmann is in a unique position in this sphere where he's able to go even more extreme, right? So instead of like co-opting an already existing IP, he's able to make a new IP from scratch and make it like woke from the onset, right? And what that results in is something that's even worse, right? Like, and again, like Neil Druckmann proves, I think, like why these people cannot make new IPs. Because when Neil Druckmann produces something new, what ends up happening is that nobody actually cares or watches it, right? If it wasn't for what he did with The Last of Us Part 2, nobody would even know that this game even existed, right? So, with that being said, going into this this new cycle of like games we're supposed to be looking forward to, like there's just nothing. Like I've said in the past that there's nothing on the horizon that looks good or interesting or I'm looking forward to. After the disaster that was Final Fantasy 16 and Tekken 8, but like yeah, this is next level, right? In less than a decade, The Witcher went from selling 40 million units or whatever it did to like becoming completely irrelevant, which is completely insane if you think about it. Like this series was such a huge thing for like casual gamers and people who are into Game of Thrones and people who don't really play video games all that much. Like this should have been a good gateway franchise to introduce people to better fantasy titles like the Super Mario Bros, like The Legend of Zelda, like Xenoblade, Fire Emblem, but it wasn't, you know? Like The Witcher just kind of stagnated and just kind of fell off and its audience no longer really plays or cares about video games at all. And as a result of that, The Witcher 4 is going to be a complete and utter disaster.